because throughout the course of the season, things are going to happen. People are going to get the flu. People are going to turn ankles. But the depth of this team and the shooting of this team, I don't know if you feel this way, but I think would have a chance to be the best that it's been here in the last 3 years.
This is the Jon Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing. Now, here's your hosts, Paul Fritchner and Adam Baum, with the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Jon Miller.
Welcome into another episode of the Jon Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing and the official payroll sponsor of the Jon Miller Podcast, Payroll Partners. I'm Paul Fritchner, alongside the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Jon Miller. Adam is not with us this week, but to my left, we have a very special guest today. It is CBS Sports college basketball reporter and the host of the College Hoops Today podcast. It is Jon Rothstein. Jon, welcome to the Jon Miller Podcast. How are you?
Good to be here. Where's the graders? I thought you would have raspberry chip like ready.
Graders is a dessert. Yeah, we do that at the end, not at the beginning.
Fair enough.
You're coming off 2 straight nights at Jeff Ruby's?
2 straight nights at Jeff Ruby's.
You went with the pork chop.
Went with the pork chop.
Not a steak. You know, he's a sushi guy.
Love good sushi, but no, during the week, I try to keep the calories as clean as possible. I try not to do any red meat during the week, try to do no pasta during the week. So I try to really earn my cheat meals when it gets like Friday to Sunday, always on Sunday.
All right. Well, we're here at Xavier today. So I think the best way to start this is to talk about the team, because this is the last show that's going to air before people actually see the team. So we're recording this when you're here at Xavier. It's October 3rd, but this is going to go out on the 14th. And the next time that people see this show, it's going to be real effectively. You're going to see Dayton. You're going to see Musketeer Madness. Basketball is it's right around the corner. How many days from today?
From today, we're at 32.
32
we're taping
days.
this. 4 weeks from Monday, we will have college basketball.
So you've been on. So it's just kind of wild, just in the flesh where you.
I'm a real person. A lot of people didn't think I was a real person, and I just had to get a computer-generated Twitter account. No, I'm here. I'm the one who pushes send.
But Jon, again, you're the guest on this podcast, and we're going to flip the script and we're going to interview you, so to speak, and ask you some questions as well. And look, we kid around, and you can kid around on whether it be about food and the off season in college basketball, but you love it. You're consumed by it, and I think in all of us that are about sports to some degree, you're in love with the game itself, and then the job almost follows. And I think the great compliment that I can pay you from a coach perspective, and I think I speak for all coaches, is just that your ability to just be about it, whether that be in May, whether that be early in the fall, and being knowledgeable and putting in great work to know the game that you love. I think that's why you're the best in the business. So
appreciate it.
I want you to know that, I think all of us who are part of college basketball appreciate your work ethic, your passion for it, because you bring a knowledge base that, quite frankly, not everybody has that plays the role that you play.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I think the best way to describe it was I was at a Michigan State practice, and Tom Izzo had his team huddled, and he said, "Do you guys like this? Do you love it, or do you live it?" And I think the best way I can respond to what you just said is, I live it.
That's right.
It doesn't stop all of a sudden. If the national title game ends, whoever's playing, it just goes and it goes and it goes.
Yep.
And there's so many things, I think, in college basketball that make it so unique, because I can tell you this much: nobody, and I mean nobody, at the end of the regular season last year, especially when they were trailing Louisville in the Tuesday game of the ACC tournament, said NC State's going to win 5 games in 5 days and then go to a Final Four. And there's so many different things that make it unique. I know we've had a lot of changes off the court in the last 4 or 5 years, but the pageantry of college basketball and the unpredictability is what makes it, in my opinion, the greatest thing we have in American sports, because we have the greatest postseason in sports, and under no circumstances, regardless of what happens, should it ever expand.
Yeah. No, I know you're strong on that. And, I'm a big NFL fan. It's in some ways it's my fix to escape college basketball. You live it, you're about it every day. Coach, what do you like to do besides dealing with college basketball? Everything that entails. I love following the Pittsburgh Steelers. I love following Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, and Sunday just being able to go. But what draws me to it is I think it's, the parity of it is unlike any other sport in the world.
Yes.
I mean, here we are late December where you look at this 17-week grueling, game after game, the scores of the game, but like more than half the league, 3/4 of the league still has the ability to potentially be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And then you get into playoffs, and I know the Chiefs have won it recently, but you see these teams go on a road and you're like, how did they just beat Baltimore at Baltimore, right? That's what I believe the Chiefs did a year ago. You know, you look at that, but that's what brings out, I think, the energy about that sport, the parity. Well, our sport, there's never been more parity.
Yeah.
I remember being a 1 seed at Arizona and feeling that burden of, dear God, please don't allow me to be the first 1 seed to lose to the 16.
No question.
Now, I know you can't live life like that. You can't practice like that. You can't talk to your team like that. But trust me, when they score and they go up 2-0, you're like,
no, for sure.
Hey, well, we want this to be easy today, right? But now, that 1-16, you can go 2-15. We're talking about what used to be a mail-in.
Yeah.
At least these 8 teams are going to advance. I don't think anybody can count on that now in March Madness. And the same thing, you used NC State as the example, the parity of a mid-major team entering that space in a first-round matchup and knowing that 5-12, 4-13, even 3-14 now, those matchups seed-wise, I just think like it's never been more murky, more like anything can happen. And to your point, I think regardless of all the changes that we've experienced, it actually makes what's already special even more special, I believe.
Well, and you go back 2 years ago and you think about what happened with Fairleigh Dickinson and Purdue. Yeah. Fairleigh Dickinson wasn't good enough to win the Northeast Conference tournament. And I want to, make full respect to that program and Tobin Anderson, their coach who's now at Iona now. But they weren't good enough to win the Northeast Conference tournament. Merrimack won that tournament, but because of the transitional rule, FDU went to the NCAA tournament. As you know, I've done coverage on the first 4 of the last couple of years, so I did that, obviously, and their game there a couple of years ago. And they played great. I believe they played Texas Southern with Johnny Jones. They play a great style, they share it, but they're going then up in the next game against a team that won outright the Big Ten regular season and tournament title. And then all of a sudden, 3 days later, they beat Purdue. And it wasn't a buzzer beater shot. They won by a couple of possessions, but with a minute to go, they had control of the game. There's so many different things, I think, that are fascinating right now about the state of college basketball. I think it's a lot better because we finally have NIL, so players who might have tried to play in the G League or try and play professionally are now coming back and being compensated as they should have been for a long time. And that, I think, will bring people in from the periphery because people are going to be able to identify more now with the R.J. Davises and the Hunter Dickinsons. But the unpredictability right now and the access that these mid-major programs that aren't in power conferences have to really good players also levels the playing field. You guys know I've been running around, obviously, this area. I was at Dayton yesterday. They have a player, Posh Alexander, who you coached against, who has years of Big East experience. They have a player, Zed Key, who has played meaningful minutes at Ohio State. Now, that Dayton team, who you guys are going to play in a charity exhibition, is also going to go to the Maui Invitational. They're going to play Cincinnati. They're going to play Marquette. But they have players already in their program that aren't going to be intimidated by playing a higher-level team. So we talk, I think, so much about players transferring up. You guys have obviously created a tremendous platform for players from mid-major conferences on the perimeter. Sule Boom, Quincy Oliveri. This year we'll obviously get into more of a couple to come to Xavier and perform in the Big East Conference. But the portal works both ways in that regard, and that's why I think you're going to see more and more mid-major teams go into the NCAA tournament and have an opportunity to win. I also want to point this out because player retention, I think, is really, really important. It's one of the most important things in this climate. When you study now these mid-major conference tournaments, so many teams that are winning the regular season title don't win the conference tournament because the pressure that they feel obviously is immense, but also because there's not the continuity at the mid-major level that there used to be. I remember for years when Steve Peichel was the coach at Stony Brook before he got the Rutgers job, I would drive out to Long Island. He had great teams. He had a kid, Jameel Warney, who was probably a high major player, and they would always win in the regular season. but they would lose in the America East Conference tournament. I would drive, I'd be like, when it comes, for championship week, I'm going to be more prepared in the studio because I'm going to go 4 or 5 minutes on Stony Brook. Then they would lose and I'd be devastated. And I think now what we're getting is mid-major conference tournaments are really the beginning of the infrastructure of March Madness. We all love Selection Sunday. We all love the first 4 and that Thursday, Friday. But if you think about it, our sport begins a week prior. And, Sean, doing this now close to 20 years, coaches have always told me, who have coached at the pure mid-major level, the most pressure that they have felt was being a heavy favorite in a mid-major conference tournament. If memory serves correct, one of your first years at Xavier, were not favored to win the Atlantic 10 tournament, and I think you beat St. Joe's in the title game.
In Cincinnati.
And you've had some great, obviously, moments in your coaching career, but I would imagine that the sheer euphoria of that had to be near the top. And I think conversely, too, in 2008, when you had that great team that lost to UCLA in the Elite Eight, in the first round game, you played a Georgia team that came out of nowhere to win the SEC tournament
so I
and get
think
the automatic qualifier.
If I'm right, it was a 3 versus 14.
Right.
Yeah.
They were 14.
Yeah.
The bizarre turn of events in the SEC tournament that year.
There was a flood.
Yeah. I think
like a storm, right?
Yeah.
In the Georgia Dome.
Yeah.
Which created a lot of unintended consequences in that tournament. But I remember thinking, wait, so we're a 3 seed. We're going to play a 14 seed.
From the SEC.
And it's Georgia who just won 3 or 4 games or 4 games in a row there in the SEC tournament. Yeah. But again, that goes back to what we just finished talking about. And I'll use TJ McConnell as the example. He was a guest on one of our recent podcasts, and it was interesting to hear him talk about the difference of, playing in the NBA playoffs or playoff series versus playing in March Madness.
Yeah.
And his point was just very straightforward, and it goes to what we just talked about. What makes the NCAA tournament so special for everybody? It's the best team won't always win.
Yes.
It's going to be the best team or the best player or the hottest team in that 2-hour window, that 40-minute one-shot deal. By the way, sometimes, for example, the neutral site plays into the hands of one team versus the other. And that's not taken into account either, right? The region and how far they have to travel to go and play that first game. But, a 7-game series in the NBA, I don't know anything about that. But, as you listen to these players that have done it, like Aaron Gordon, I talked to him, and one of the series that he talks about is playing against LeBron in the Lakers and the wearing down effect of having to deal with him 4, 5, 6 times. In a short period of time, what it does physically to you. Forget the mental part, In the NCAA tournament, there's none of that. But what there is, you're down 10 with 8 minutes to go. There is no game 2. And I think that those that have played in college basketball and have gone to the NBA, that's what they really remember the most about our game.
Yeah, no question.
The Sean Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Deer Park Roofing, a company that's provided elite service for homes and businesses since 1996 and leads the industry in professionalism, quality, and responsiveness. Whether your needs are residential or commercial, like the outstanding work on the Cintas Center, the home of Xavier basketball, Deer Park can handle any job and ensure it's done right. Deer Park's motto is protect what's important, and what's important to you is important to Deer Park Roofing. Visit deerparkroofing.com.
What makes us human? Humanity is found in the actions that redefine care. Actions that we at TriHealth take every day. By seeing those who feel invisible, hearing needs that have been ignored, TriHealth is healing the body and the human spirit, so all can know and live a better life.
Welcome back here to the Sean Miller Podcast, joined by CBS Sports college basketball reporter Jon Rothstein. And Jon, something I think that has really transformed college basketball, and of course it's maybe the most obvious thing in the last couple of years, is the transfer portal driven by NIL and everything else. But I think the landscape of college basketball and the way the transfer portal has affected every level of college basketball and specifically here when you're talking about the non-conference schedule and a lot of players that come in, and Sean, you just used a word that are not intimidated by players or situations where you're coming in and playing these high major schools. You had a point just there in our break about what it's like to play in those types of games now in the non-conference.
Yeah, again, I think as you talk about the world of college basketball is flipped upside down, maybe 2 times over in recent time, the last 3 to 5 years. I think one of the things that's much different today than it's ever been is the teams that you're playing in November before you get into conference play. And at times, they have the kind of the mid-major connotation next to their name. They're not the heavyweight or neutral site opponent. But those games are more complex and trickier now than ever because those programs also have the same opportunity to get older and more experienced like you do. And, I felt it a year ago, and some of it was that we weren't as good. But you're looking at the roster prior to the game, you're like, okay, the starting point guard is a 5th-year transfer. He's in his 5th year of college basketball. Their starting 2 guard is a 3-year starter. And by the way, he played in our conference. And now he's playing against us, right? He's in his 4th year. And you go through their top 8, and I think a lot of those games, John, there's more experience with those programs and teams than ever before.
Yeah.
And if you are a coach and, you look at Kentucky a year ago, as talented as they were, and they were a very good team, you think about coaching that group of players in the month of November when this is their 1st through 5th college game ever.
Yeah.
I don't care how talented you are, and then you're playing against guys that have been in college for 4 and 5 years at this level that I'm describing. Yeah. It reminds me of some of these earlier rounds of the NCAA tournament. And I think the awareness and scheduling and just, again, you talk about what makes college basketball great. My prediction would be I think there'll be more upsets in these earlier months of our season than ever before because of what I just brought up.
The epitome of brutality.
Yeah, and look, it's tricky because you're trying to play a balanced schedule. Even in our case, we have a more experienced team this year, but we're not experienced together. When we run out on the court for the first time, that's truly going to be the first time that our group has ever been together as a Xavier team. So we still don't have that experience, and we won't have that until maybe mid-December. So not to use the word vulnerable, but again, back to my point, when you have so much uncertainty and so much change from one season to the next, it can work in so many different ways.
Well, and you think about it, too, the 2 teams that played for a national championship last year, look at the retention that those programs had. Yeah. Tristan Newton, Donovan Clingan, Alex Caravan were all a part of the first run for UConn the year prior. So was Samson Johnson. Zach Edey, Mason Gillis, Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer were all a part of the Purdue team who we just talked about was a 1 seed the year prior. So if you think about that and you really split the atom, 7 of the 10 starters in the national championship game were in their respective programs the season prior. And that's obviously the game that determines the national champion.
Yeah, no, you're for sure. You're right. Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head a few minutes ago as well. And Zach Edey would have been a great example. If Zach Edey would have left Purdue, which you could make the argument probably either way prior to the year beginning, he had every right to explore his professional opportunities, but he decided to come back. What a difference that was. And I look at, our league, Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Yeah.
I don't think he gets nearly enough credit nationally for the terrific player that he is. His impact defensively in every game that he plays, and it's not just because of his shot blocks, but it's because of the coverage that Creighton plays. He's like a great point guard, John, in that his ability defensively makes his teammates better on the defensive side of the ball. And then you start looking at offense, and he gets put in this category of, well, he's not really a scorer.
Right.
You look at his efficiency and his ability to be in double figures, and now you go, okay, factor in the experience. I mean, that's a big deal that he returned to Creighton, and I think he really makes our league significantly better.
And he plays a position at the front of the rim defensively, and he has an incredible ability to defend without fouling. Little known fact, in 4 years at Creighton, Ryan Kalkbrenner has never fouled out of a game.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And I also want to correct myself. Trey Kaufman-Wren started for Purdue. Gillis came off the bench. I'm just a perfectionist.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm leaving that in.
Yeah. Fair enough. That's fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Just want to make sure, the internet's a savage of a place.
That's right. So I think that's a good jumping off point here to talk about this team, the Xavier team that you're here to watch today. I want to talk a little bit about Dayton, who you saw yesterday, because as I said, this is going to be the last show that people listen to before Xavier and Dayton play on October 20th, which is really the first time. It is the first time that fans will be able to see Xavier play somebody that's not the inter-squad scrimmage for Musketeer Madness. So let's start with Xavier and this team that Xavier brings back. And you have, a core of Jerome Hunter and Zach Fremantle and Dalen Swain and Davion McKnight and Trey Green. But you also bring in a very experienced transfer class. Yeah. One of maybe the most experienced transfer class in terms of Division I minutes in the Big East. Have guys that have played, like Marcus Foster winning an NCAA tournament game at Furman. All these topics that our listeners here have heard about extensively over the last 6 months, but that now here as we bring you on and maybe others are listening to this, you say that this is a Xavier team that is going to need to mesh because they're all playing together for the first time. But just as far as a Division I group, extremely experienced team.
Well, I think you have to look at it like this. Xavier made 224 three-point shots last year as a team. The 3 perimeter transfers that you've brought in, Marcus Foster, Dante Maddox, Ryan Conwell, made a combined 230 last year among the 3 of them. So from 30,000 feet, and I'm sure I'll get a better feel after I watch practice, I think there's an opportunity for you to be a better shooting team and potentially a prolific shooting team. And I also think, with Zach Fremantle back, you're going to get higher percentage looks because defenses are not going to be able to solely key on the people on the perimeter. And, with those guys coming back too, I think it brings up an interesting, bigger picture thought. Doing this for as long as I have, I think when teams lose one player of significance, you can retool, you can kind of recalibrate. I think back to your team in 2014 that lost Brandon Ashley at Arizona, and you were able to retool, and if memory serves correct, you moved Gabe York into the starting lineup, and then Rondé Hollis Jefferson was, your 6th man, and you were inches away from the Final Four. And I think, the 2 teams I would probably say doing this that I think were surefire Final Four teams but didn't get there was that team, if it was healthy, and then the UCLA team 2 years ago that was 27-4. Yeah. And on the last day of the regular season lost the National Defensive Player of the Year, Jalen Clark, and then also lost Adem Bona, who was the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year in the Pac-12 tournament. Those 2 teams always stand out for me. Now, I think if Xavier can get Fremantle and Hunter back, it gives you what I like to look at quality depth, because throughout the course of the season, things are going to happen. People are going to get the flu. People are going to turn ankles. But the depth of this team and the shooting of this team, I don't know if you feel this way, but I think would have a chance to be the best that it's been here in the last 3 years.
Yeah, we really set out in the spring, John, and when I say we, every college basketball staff, they're setting out on their new course each spring, right? Again, you talk about the change. I really feel like the spring has become what the fall once was. The pressure of late September and October leading to the early signing period, and are we going to get this guy or not get this guy? And the whole world was captivated on who's going to have the best recruiting class. Well, that's been replaced by the time, and that's still important, the fall, but the spring, there's a lot more going on than ever before. But the course we set out on was really threefold. To get more experience, in particular in the Big East, because I think it's a league that's always favored experience. To be deeper for the reason you said. Mike Tomlin of the Steelers always talks about December football. It's cold outside, AFC North, the offensive and defensive lines, being able to run the ball, and the physical I've not done it, but I can't imagine what you feel like as a football team at that point in the year. Some teams are just physically and mentally beat up. So, how do you win in December? You build your team for that. Well, I think the Big East, I would look at it almost in February. Yeah. When you're in February, a lot has happened. Yeah. And it's not all going to be good. Right. Injuries, players that aren't performing, tough losses. You start to go through it. How do you win in that month leading into March? And I think depth.
Yes.
Being able to play through foul trouble, injuries, illness, and these things that we're talking about. So we wanted depth, experience, and, you're one of the rare guys that have caught on to it. I also just think that the game has changed. It's not the same game as it once was, and the skill level, being able to make free throws, being able to have three-point shooters at different positions, having overall just more firepower. You start talking about not getting eliminated in the NCAA tournaments early rounds, or how can you pull off the big upset? I think usually one key, look at the three-point shooting on that particular day, on that particular night. So we tried to do that. We'll see. I feel like based on my eyes with our team that we've really improved that. And now it's up to us to bring it to life in a schedule.
I think people too, I don't want to say they forgot, but I think the last game that Zach Fremantle played 2 years ago was a win at Gamble Pavilion against UConn. And he was 15-8. He was going to be first or second team All Big East. And before UConn really became the force that they were in terms of the NCAA tournament, Xavier swept UConn in 22-23 on that Sweet 16 team. And then obviously Zach was lost for the season, but he's somebody, again, I think that is kind of an off-the-radar piece in college basketball because he's somebody who was, I think, just a unique player, played really well in that game with Jack Nungy. And, Jerome Hunter was somebody who I think everybody would agree was one of the top utility players in college basketball that year in February and in March. And I think the beauty of this team potentially is they don't have to do it alone up front. There's reinforcements, which, we've spoke about. So the feeling I have from 30,000 feet, and again, I think I'll have a better feeling after practice, is the mold of this Xavier team reminds me of the teams you had here in 08 and 09.
Yeah. So I think in 2007, and you might want to start in 2006. From 2006, 7, and 8, I left. Chris Mack was in 09. And you just kind of look at that 4-year window. That's how college basketball used to be. It's actually what we've talked a lot about already. Yeah. And what did we have at Xavier? Yeah. We had amazing retention and experience.
Yes.
We had players that had been in our program for not just 2 years, but in some cases 3 and 4 year starters, right? We had great depth. We never overwhelmed you with 1 or 2 players being better than your 1 or 2. But what we always were able to do is if you go 8, 9, that we were able to really go toe-to-toe with just about everybody, minus a couple. And the experiences that we had in those times, if you look at it, it started with a tough loss against Ohio State in round 2 of the NCAA tournament.
Ron Lewis.
That would have been, God.
Is that loss as difficult as the Elite 8 losses?
That's the most significant loss that I've ever experienced, because to some degree, maybe a large degree, like I blame myself. When
you
you're
think about fouling?
When you're up 3 with that time and that scenario, why not lose another way, foul.
Yeah.
And now, on the good part, we've done that quite a bit since.
Right.
And it's worked out well, but that loss will never go away. But if you track Xavier, and I think that's 2006, then it went 2007, which would have been the Elite 8 against UCLA. The following year, a tough loss in the Sweet 16 to Pitt, who was a 1 seed in Boston.
Levance.
Yeah. Great shot. But again, you think to that game, that was like anybody's game until the final play.
Yeah.
And then the following year, which had been Coach Mack taking over, was the double overtime loss to Kansas State in the Sweet 16, which would have been Xavier Butler for the Final Four. And that would have been Butler's first ever Final Four under Brad Stevens. So that was a 4-year window of time where I think all of us here point to as a great source of pride in that we were close to being at the top of college basketball when you consider what I just walked you through 4 years in a row. And, whether we can get back to that, we're going to see, but we're going to try hard.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun to cover.
All right, let's talk about Dayton. You saw Dayton yesterday. Obviously, don't want to ask you anything sensitive from practice, but just kind of your overall thoughts on the team. I know you're going to see Cincinnati later this afternoon, but you're kind of doing this whole Midwest trip right now. Xavier and Cincinnati, everybody knows about that game, but let's start with Dayton first. just your overall thoughts on the Flyers and maybe what Xavier fans can expect to see in that game up at UD Arena.
Spending a lot of time with Coach Grant, I think that Dayton feels really good about their perimeter. Malachi Smith is back healthy, who's obviously an all-Atlantic 10 caliber point guard. We've spoke about Posh Alexander. They also bring back Javon Bennett, who was a good player for them last year, and Enoch Cheeks. So that's 4 pretty accomplished college players for 3 perimeter spots. Yeah. Nate Santos, a Pitt transfer, is a good stretch 4 who's going to gives them a skilled look. And then Zed Key, as we mentioned, is going to be their main interior guy. I think it's safe to say that we can expect that Dayton will be in the top third of the Atlantic 10 with VCU, Loyola Chicago, St. Joe's, St. Louis. Whether or not they'll be an NCAA tournament team, I think will depend on what Dayton does in November and December. And I think when you look at how difficult it is for non-power conference teams to schedule, the bevy of opportunities that Dayton has is really amazing. They have UNLV at home. They have Northwestern at home, who's been in back-to-back NCAA tournaments. They have Marquette at home. They'll play a neutral site game against Cincinnati. That's 4. And then they have 3 in the Maui Invitational. Well, what's the Maui Invitational going to look like? You open with Carolina, and if you lose that, you have Auburn or Iowa State. Yeah. And on the other side of the bracket, it's UConn, Memphis, and Michigan State, Colorado. So that's 7 high-level games for Dayton. I think if they get 3, they'll be in good shape. And I think if they get 4, they'll have an excellent chance at an at-large bid. So with the way things have shifted, the entire Atlantic 10 needs Dayton to win 3 or 4 games because, as we know, a rising tide lifts all boats, in a lot of ways because it's become so difficult for teams at that level. And I'm sure Archie talks to you about this all the time, to get quality games. A program like Dayton that has such a strong brand is going to have to carry the flag. St. Joe's, too, has a very, very deep non-conference schedule in terms of opportunities. And when you study this, you see that St. Joe's, with their opportunities in the non-conference, are all either in the city of Philadelphia or they're in New York. They don't have to get on a plane. St. Joe's is going to host Villanova. They're going to play Virginia Tech at the Palestra, and then they go to a tournament in the Barclays Center, a 2-day tournament where they play Texas Tech, and then they play the winner-loser of Texas and Syracuse. So this is all within the Northeast corridor right now.
Yeah, nice. That's some good information right there.
Do you want to get into Cincinnati? You're going to tee me up. I got on a roll there. I felt like I wasn't doing a studio show.
We'll leave them alone. I think that the other part about Dayton, we're getting ready to go up there and play the game, and obviously, the cause. Yes. Which is regarding suicide awareness, mental health awareness, which I know is deep and hits home in their program, Coach Grant. For us to be a part of that and be able to raise awareness, raise money for that cause, I think is what Xavier and Dayton are all about as universities. Yeah. And I think for us to play a role in that, we feel incredibly almost blessed on our end to have a chance to do that and to do it playing this game. That now leads to the second part, and that is for us to play in front of that crowd. At this point, whether it be me as a player or as a coach, assistant head coach, and you say, give me the most vicious or the most difficult or the fiercest crowds that you've ever been a part of as a visiting team, I would go to UD Arena with Xavier as the team that I'm a part of, right? Yeah. Xavier at UD Arena, Xavier Dayton game. So I have no doubt that even though it's October and even though it's for a great cause and it's an exhibition game, that we're going to experience some of that. But I think it's also going to be very valuable for us because it's going to prepare us for the Crosstown Shootout at UC and playing every road game in the Big East, because I think playing on the road in the Big East, it's as difficult as any league in America.
We talked earlier just about how great college basketball is and the pageantry and the unpredictability. The thing about college basketball that I enjoy so much, just covering it for as long as I had, no coach has the same personality. And there are so many personalities. There are so many personalities. They are so unique, and everybody has a different anecdote. So I think that adds to it, and the fan bases that are so passionate. Right. I mean, I think it adds to it. And the Big East has, I think, in my opinion, a leg up on other leagues because of the passion of the fan bases. Obviously, the coaches are incredible personalities, but this is the show in town in this league. Mm-hmm. There is no football Saturday to recruit. Yeah. This is the deal, and I'm a big, advocate of metropolitan area cities with great places to eat. Like we were talking about your son, my wife's brother, they live in Denver. I'm not somebody who's going to go for a hike.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Same, John.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not somebody who's going to go for a hike.
No, John, I go back into the late 80s, early 90s when I was a player, student athlete at Pitt. And obviously we were a part of the Big East then. And, arguably you can make the case that it was the greatest conference ever.
Yes.
I know there are certainly arguments, the ACC in many different periods of time. If you look at the coaches and where they were in their respective careers, you're like, that had to be the greatest moment in college basketball when you consider what that would have felt like to play in the ACC at that moment, right?
Yeah.
Well, when I played in the Big East, Jim Calhoun was just building UConn.
Yeah.
At that point, that was pre-everything, right?
Yeah.
So think about it. He would have been 6th or 7th in terms of notable coaches or what he had accomplished at that point.
Yeah.
PJ Carlesimo had Seton Hall in the national championship game with this close of a chance to win the national championship, right? Syracuse was in the league, and the Carrier Dome was a real thing. Not that it isn't now, but playing in the Carrier Dome in front of 32,000 people on a meaningful Saturday, again, those are memories that last a lifetime. Anyone that's ever done that stands near the top of your list of what it felt like to play college basketball. So, back to your point, only show in town, what it felt like to be able to go on the road and win.
Yeah.
Back in the day, you played Georgetown at the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland, and what that felt like to have Big John Thompson as their coach and their fans and that team full of talent. So, it's what makes the Big East, beyond special is what it means to each institution that we are the front porch of the sports part of things in at our respective campuses, and you feel that on game night, especially away games.
Well, when I started doing this almost 20 years ago, before I went to CBS in 2010, my first TV job was at the MSG Network, our regional television network in New York. I don't know if Paul was born yet at that time, but I remember the Big East tournament prior to realignment when there were 16 teams and you had multiple Hall of Famers. That tournament wasn't the NCAA tournament, but it felt like comparable.
Yeah.
It felt like it was AAA. I remember in 2009 in the NCAA tournament, the year you guys lost to Pitt, there were 3 Big East teams who were number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament. Louisville, Pitt, and UConn, and Villanova went to the Final Four that year. It was Jay Wright's first Final Four as a 3 seed. And I remember the Friday night at the Big East tournament, the semifinals, it was Louisville against Villanova, so it's Rick Pitino against Jay Wright, and then it's Syracuse when they had Johnny Flynn against Bob Huggins at West Virginia. And in the quarters the night before, remember Pitt was a 1 seed that year, West Virginia had beaten Pitt. That was a quarterfinal game in the Big East tournament. So you have Rick Pitino against Jay Wright and Jim Boeheim against Bob Huggins, all in the semifinals. That league, and I'm thrilled that the league has stayed together. I'm thrilled that the league has maintained its presence in Madison Square Garden. You know how I feel about that building and the greatest city in the world. So it's special that we're gearing up right now, Paul. As you know, 4 weeks from Monday, we will have college basketball.
Stop renting your power, own it. TGE Solar makes it easy to purchase solar panels for your home or business so you can take control of your monthly electricity bill and start saving today. They'll help you find the best solar system to meet your needs, and their expert in-house installation team makes the process seamless. They're proud to be based in Cincinnati, family owned and operated by a Xavier alum. Mention this podcast and save $1,000. Visit TGESolar.com to request your free energy evaluation today. The Jon Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Payroll Partners, where you're not just a number. That means providing a best-in-class HR and payroll experience that was built on award-winning technology and live support customer service with a dedicated payroll specialist who's just a phone call away. You shouldn't have to choose between technology and customer service. At Payroll Partners, you get both. Payroll Partners is locally owned and operated by a proud Xavier alum. Visit payrollpartners.net. That's payrollpartners.net. Just real quick, I know you're gonna get off here on your own thoughts on the Big East.
Yeah.
Let's see how quickly we can do this. Just give your own, as you say, 30,000-foot view of what this conference is going to look like this year.
Well,
Let me start with this. I'm going to give you some context.
Yeah.
Don't ever underestimate the power of who finishes last and next to last in a major conference. Meaning, how good are they? There are teams that sometimes finish near the bottom or at the bottom of a conference, and you look at what they did in the non-conference schedule.
Right.
They brought quality wins. They brought a winning record. By the way, even in the conference season, they had major upsets. They sometimes can beat the best team in our league. I think that this year, whoever's at the bottom will be the best bottom of the Big East in a long time. And everybody's fixated on who's going to win it, who's at the top, who's going to make the tournament. But what allows that fifth team in a given year to get an at-large bid or to get that one more team in March Madness a lot of times has to do with the bottom. And I think Ed Cooley now having the opportunity to be in year 2, Chris Holtman being at DePaul, those two guys are great coaches. They've built programs. They've been at other places. They know our league. Both guys know our league really well. I think that the bottom is going to be more of a revolving door. And I think that this year, one of the things I'll start with in the Big East is I think from top to bottom, it's going to be as good as it's been in a long, long time.
I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And I also think we should, for context purposes, the Big East was the victim of a perfect storm last year on Selection Sunday when it comes to bid, obviously, distribution. But I want to point out that NC State would not have been in the NCAA tournament had it not won the ACC tournament. Oregon would have not been in the NCAA tournament if it hadn't won the Pac-12 tournament. As it turns out, New Mexico would not have been in the NCAA tournament if it didn't win the Mountain West tournament. Duquesne in your home city of Pittsburgh would not. So that's 4 spots that were taken up by bid stealers. There's going to be significantly more, I think, teams in the NCAA tournament from the Big East in 2025. When you look at the
But John.
Yeah.
I would just caution you on this. Why would anybody think that trend wouldn't continue based on everything that we've talked about? I'll use Duquesne as the example. They're playing by a different set of rules in the new world of college basketball than they would have a decade, 20, 25 years ago. And there's going to be versions of what you just described in conference tournaments moving forward, more prevalent than ever before because of what you said, and that is there's more change from one season to the next. And some of this change isn't happening with a 19-year-old freshman who's developing for the first time and is hitting his stride in March. No, it's going to be a legacy player that's playing in his 5th year, his 4th year, who's been at a couple different schools, who's battle-tested, and he's entering that conference tournament saying, this is going to be my last game ever in college basketball if I lose. And I think the parity of those conference tournaments and the upsets at that mid-major level will be more, not less than ever before. And one of the fears that I think all of us have as coaches is when you start talking about getting at-large bids, it's always been really difficult. There's always teams that are left out on Selection Sunday. But I don't know why anybody would think that what happened last year won't continue at some level because we've described why it happened.
Yes.
And I think that you're going to continue to see that trend. And, go ahead.
Remember in the movie, Remember the Titans, when the coach says, leave no doubt?
Yeah.
That's what you have to do when it comes to the NCAA tournament. You have to make it clear cut that you are going to be a single-digit seed, not to sweat. Now, what is my thought, obviously, from 30,000 feet on the Big East? Everybody's chasing UConn. That's obvious. Now, UConn has won 12 NCAA tournament games in the last 2 years by an average of 21.7 points per game.
Amazing.
So even if they're 15 points worse, they're still 6 points better than everybody else. So I want to point out, too, Marquette returned 7 of the 8 players that made the Big East tournament final and lost to UConn. So I think that's swept under the rug a little bit because I lost Kolick and Iguodaro. So they don't have what they had, but they still have enough. Creighton lost to big-time producers on the wing in Shireman, in Trey Alexander. There's going to be more pressure, I think, on Stephen Ashworth at the start of the season to produce offensively. As important of a transfer in the conference is Pop Isaacs from Texas Tech. Creighton needs him, in my opinion, to be an all Big East caliber player to remain what they've been in the last couple of years. I think Xavier and St. John's will be the two most improved teams in the conference. I've seen St. John's. Their talent level is considerably better than the team last year that just missed the NCAA tournament and lost to UConn by 5 in the Big East tournament semifinals. Providence, I've seen improve rim protection, maybe the deepest team I've seen so far among Big East teams. Obviously, the health of Bryce Hopkins is going to play a major role there, and we know they're going to have a lethal home court advantage. I think the sneaky team in the Big East is your old boss, Thad Mott at Butler, because we talk so much about returning personnel. Telfort and Pierre Brooks are
players.
Back as double-figure scorers, and they're seasoned. They also have added players who, again, have proven themselves at the power conference level. Patrick McCaffrey was a good player at Iowa, and they added a player, Jamie Kaiser, from Maryland, who was a top 50 recruit. And when he signed, people said this is going to be start of the resurgence of Maryland. So Butler, to me, is sneaky. And a lot of people forget Butler, up until about mid-February, was firmly on the NCAA tournament bubble.
Yeah.
So
they had some of the best wins in our conference on the road a year ago. They won at Creighton.
Yeah.
You know, I think they won at Marquette. Did they win at Marquette?
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah, we had
Butler,
that game.
I mean, if you go at Creighton and at Marquette, you're a really good team. It's back to my point about what makes a conference the best it can be. It's when you have a variety of different teams that on a given night, whether that game be played at home or away, can win. And I think that when you start talking top to bottom, the bottom being stronger is a really good thing. And I know this will be year 3 for me in the Big East. This will be the best top to bottom league that I've coached in, because it's not just who's near the top or middle, but I think that firmly we have some really good coaches and we have some great improvement happening throughout. 1 through 11, and look, hopefully we're a part of that.
Yeah, and you had referenced obviously DePaul and Georgetown being improved. I've seen Villanova. Villanova might have 2 of the best 10 players in the Big East, and Eric Dixon and Wooga Poplar, who was a part of a Final Four team at Miami. Jameer Brickus, again, if we talked about how Pop Isaacs is maybe the most important transfer, he's the most under-the-radar transfer because Jameer Brickus has to be for Villanova kind of like what Maurice Watson was for Creighton years ago, an impact facilitating table-setting guard for Villanova to surprise, I think, and be back in the Big East top tier. And then you can't count out Seton Hall, who has continually overachieved, under Shaheen Holloway. So from 30,000 feet, we're all chasing stores. There's probably more left over in Milwaukee than people realize. Creighton needs Pop Isaacs to be an all Big East caliber player. Providence, maybe the deepest team. The health of Bryce Hopkins is one, obviously, that we're going to watch closely. And I will say it again, I think Xavier and St. John's will be the most improved teams in the Big East and teams that I believe will be regularly in the top 25.
All right, we're going to wrap this show up here real quick, but we can't let you get out of here with talking a little food.
Okay, great.
You guys were talking food before we came on the air, talking pizza in Manhattan, going all through that. Come here to Cincinnati, you get Jeff Ruby's. Anything else in the Big East? When you go around and you do this preseason media tour and you say, all right, I'm going to this city. What is that city and what do you get?
Only Big East cities?
Yeah, only Big East cities.
Well, the Italian food in Providence, I have a soft spot for. But, it's also, Paul, we're trying to get ready for the season, so we're not trying to put too much. I don't want to fit in my suit.
Yeah, sure. No doubt.
I would say.
How many suits do you have?
10 to 12.
Because you wear one to every single school you go to, right?
Only one chance to make a first impression. When I was starting my career, I was in addition to working at the MSG Network, I was doing updates and doing talk shows for the ESPN radio affiliate in New York. So Michael Kay, who's a baseball announcer, is calling the playoffs now. He's the voice of the Yankees. I was his update guy, and he brought in one day Brian Williams, who used to anchor NBC Nightly News, and he was just looking at me. He's like, who's this guy doing updates in a suit? And I was like, I've got to make a first impression. I was just going to meet you for the first time. I'm wearing a suit. So he, when I was going to the bathroom, was out in the hallway and told me how strong an impression that made. And he called my mother and told her on the phone. And then years ago, I was going to meet some friends in Rockefeller Center, for drinks or whatever on like a Friday. And I bumped into him and I said hello. And he said, where's your suit?
Yeah.
So you only have one chance in life. That was the lesson
Nice.
to make a first impression. So I'm representing myself. You're still your parents' son, and you're representing CBS Sports. So I will never not be on a college campus in a suit. Maybe, and if it's hot in July and August, I won't wear a tie. But I always try to wear a suit and tie.
I did debate wearing a suit to this show, but then I thought we'd just show off the
You got
swag.
that swag. That's nice.
Show
You
off
got to
the
be
gear.
yourself, Paul.
You gotta
Yeah,
be
that's
yourself.
right. Yeah. So Providence, you were talking about the food?
Pane and Vino is a really good Italian restaurant. I mean, there's also Pastiche, which I'm big on the desserts. Used to be able to roll off in my late 20s better than it does now, so I'm a little apprehensive.
There's a place in Cincinnati, Soto. Have you ever tried it?
Darren Savino, who who worked here for Mick Cronin at Cincinnati and is now at UCLA, was hitting that home and has always hit Soto home as a really strong place. I have a little bit of anxiety about eating, pasta like this kind of far inland in the United States. When I was in the bubble in 2021 in Indianapolis, I ordered salmon from somewhere and it wasn't the best experience. So I have a little agita with that. Gets me a little fatutzt.
Yeah, well, I think the scene here in Cincinnati, food-wise, is very underrated.
Really good.
And
really good.
Yeah, and I think we have some great spots. I'm also going to bring one that the next time you come, you got to try. And you're not going to like that I'm going to tell you. It's in the state of Kentucky, which, as you know, is right across the bridge, northern Kentucky. And it's called Mama's on Main. It's in Covington, Kentucky. And I'll tell you, quality Italian in northern Kentucky, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. And I would just ask you, follow my lead and just take me up on that. I would love to get your opinion.
Okay.
That would be one of the things I want to bring up right now. Try Mama's on Main in Covington, Kentucky.
You know what's a very under the radar Cincinnati dish, and it's more of a snack, but I found I can eat just bowls and bowls of them, is at the Montgomery, and they have those Saratoga chips with the barbecue sauce.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
no place like heaven like that.
There's also chips here in town called Grippos.
Okay.
It's going to be along the same lines. How would you describe Grippos, Paul?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Grippos just came out with a Montgomery and chip.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
it's
about
just it's the same. It's just it's hard to even describe. It's
It's like
unique,
a barbecue. We may have to get you a bag here. I'll have maybe our managers kind of give
we
that
got
to you
some.
on the road. Yeah.
Yeah, during games I'll throw out box. You come to a game.
Really?
I do a promotion during the game. We throw out boxes to fans. In
The raspberry
stands.
chip, though, is tough to beat here. The
Graters,
Graters.
black
Yeah.
raspberry chocolate chip.
Yeah, that's tough to
it's,
beat.
Yeah.
Tell you what else is tough is to just not eat the whole whatever.
Oh, yeah. You have a
Oh.
big spoon, and it's gone quickly.
That's one of those where
You're watching a Mountain West game, and all of a sudden it's
you're not
gone.
putting
Oh,
the
yeah.
lid on that and saying I'll eat the rest tomorrow. It's over. Yeah.
No, this is a very, very underrated food town. Elsewhere, I'm trying to think in the Big East. I mean, there's spots obviously everywhere. I would say Providence is one that definitely stands out. There's ice cream near Stores, Connecticut that
Sure.
people rave about. But I would say these are the ones that hit home the most.
All right. Well, John, we appreciate you taking all the time today.
Great to be here, guys.
It's been a ton of fun. How many days till college basketball?
Right now we're at 32.
God.
Not that anybody's counting. So
And John, look, I'm going to end with how I began. I think all of us as coaches and people that do this for a living in some way, shape, or form, we appreciate your work ethic, your knowledge base, your passion for the game. You make our game better because when you report on what's happening, you have a great understanding and you've done your research and you're dealing with facts. Just for example, when you brought up, the firepower of this is how many 3-point shots 3 of our incoming transfers made, and they actually made more than our entire roster a year ago. I knew we improved our firepower, but I didn't know that stat. You gave that to me, but it backs up what, one of the things that we really tried to do this off season. So hopefully we'll be able to point towards that time and time again this year.
yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Back to the Future.
Also, I like tweet. There's so much pressure around the country about the taglines. That one I felt worked because this is the second rendition.
Yeah,
this
for
is
sure.
the
Back
second
to-
rendition.
That's fine.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you. There is a character on social media that I also believe has a lot of characteristics that I'm talking about in terms of you covering the sport. Passionate, knowledgeable, connected, over the top, crazy work ethic makes our game better. The problem is this character, we don't know who it is, and it's Trilly Donovan. There are people that have said, you're Trilly Donovan. I don't believe that. So I'm
Yeah.
not even going to ask the question. I don't believe that Jon Rothstein's Trilly Donovan. But if you and I went in a room and you had an hour to be able to say, I think it's one of these people, do you know who Trilly Donovan is?
No, clueless.
Don't you think that in today's world, it's fascinating that nobody knows who it is?
I mean, in theory, I guess. I mean, I haven't really thought about it that much, but it's almost like when there was a wrestler back in the day who wore a mask. It's like, who's underneath the mask?
Yeah.
But no, I haven't given too much thought. I was surprised, though, that somebody would have that type of information and not want to, identify themselves. I think it makes it unique, though.
I mean, when I say unique, I'm only saying it because I've never seen the guy be wrong. I mean, he's on it at such a high level. I mean, great respect. Yeah, great respect. But
Anarchy? No, just Twitter.
John, thank you very much for joining us
Paul.
today on the Sean
Sean.
Miller podcast. We appreciate it. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Deer Park Roofing. And
Is that producer really where we sleep in Mayhatters just for today?
And wait, hold on. Pull up the sweat.
Oh,
There
my
it
God.
is.
He's got a Back to the Future shirt on.
He does.
there it is.
Unfathomable.
Nice. We're representing.
It's Thank you to our sponsor, Payroll Partners, as well, the official payroll sponsor of the Sean Miller podcast. This has been another episode of the Sean Miller podcast. We'll see you next week. By this time, you've watched Xavier play a game. Basketball season is right around the corner, and we'll see you next time on the Sean Miller podcast.
This has been the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing, with your hosts, Paul Fritchner and Adam Baum. Join us again soon for another episode with the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Sean Miller.